For today, the talk I'd like to give is to do with learning. And the idea of learning, which I'm going to talk about today, is that the more you have learned or the more knowledge you have, it can be a major blessing to you in life. Not the only blessing, of course, but as the talk I'm giving today is part of a series called the 38 Blessings of Life, then we come today to number 7 of the 38. And there have been some that have preceded this already, 6 in fact, mostly to do with turning our back on any bad habits in our life and turning towards any new good habits. So hopefully we have already done that by the time we come to the point of becoming more learned. The sort of things that I've already talked about were things like keeping an eye out for not getting in with the wrong sort of friends, and most recently almost finding a sense of direction by which you can start to work on yourself in terms of self-transformation in a useful way. So having oriented oneself in the proper direction, the thing which comes as the first step towards becoming self-sufficient in life in a way that you can then concentrate on more spiritual aspects, is having the knowledge by which one can stand on one's own 2 feet. And generally one would immediately think of getting some sort of training and education that will allow us to do something useful for society and at the same time to be able to earn an honest living. Yeah? And this is seen to be a blessing. Not the only blessing, but it's something that we will build upon. If we have that knowledge, then we can then do something with it. So within this grouping of blessings, learning is just one part of it. But having become learned, we need to then work on that in order to learn how to apply what we know, what would be known as craftsmanship. Having got the knowledge and the craftsmanship, then what we will see after that is that we need to have some sort of ethical awareness to know how to channel our skills and knowledge into something that is generally useful and it's not going to take advantage of others. And last but not least, being able to be skillful even in the ways we communicate with others as well. This is what this grouping of blessings to do with making oneself useful comprises of 4 parts. Today I will talk about the first part of this, at least the first half of the first part of it. So in the old days I used to say things like, oh, going to school, everyone knows that that is useful. But in recent years, especially as I'm sort of involved in the educational side of things, is that there has been increasing sort of pushback from people who believe that what is being done in schools is no longer useful or relevant to the society we live in a way that makes life quite sort of difficult for teachers and schools and people who are sort of blamed for sort of cooping up children in classrooms instead of letting them get on with their lives and so on. There have been a lot of myths put around that education is no longer useful. So there are 7 myths which are often put about, which I'll try to start by adjusting for anyone who still has some doubts about whether it's useful to become learned. So first one is that children don't need to learn facts anymore, because facts prevent children from understanding the reality of things. So, yes. the idea that someone memorizing, let's say, historical dates is no longer useful. In fact, if you are a teacher, you would know that for a child to use understanding on a deeper level, they need to base it on a whole lot of facts which they already have in their mind, which they can then build upon towards an understanding of what's going on in the present-day situation. So without those facts, then they are left with nothing to work with. A second sort of problem, which is often put about, is that if instruction is led by a teacher, then the children are just on the receiving end, so they're not actually doing anything. It's like the teacher is doing all the work for them, so therefore you need to let them have discovery learning. Well, there's quite a famous leader for this country, Winston Churchill, who was actually really bad in school. And he got put in detention quite a lot. And you know what they made him do in detention? A lot of grammar exercises. But out of learning the grammar, he later on in life said that those were the things that allowed him to become such a great orator later in life. The fact that he got all the grammar and the way to use language right from an early age, because of that very sort of mechanical learning which he did as a youngster, it actually helped him become one of his most powerful character features later in life, that basically helped everyone win the war and whatever. Third myth is that in the 21st century, everything's changed, so you can't use the old educational system anymore, because we have things like internet. And if you don't know something, then you should go out and learn about new and modern things, because they are up to date and what everyone needs to know about. The trouble is that by the time they cotton on to the things that are new and modern and need to be known about, they usually have already gone out of date. So there was a time when everyone was supposed to learn WordPerfect and programming in BASIC, because they were new and modern. But in retrospect now, we can see that those are completely useless, both of them. And in fact, what most teachers find is that although there are new things that come in, mostly it's the new things that change the most, whereas the old stuff actually doesn't change that much at all. It's sort of, there's not too much revisions made of it, and they carry on being useful for much longer. Fourth myth is that if you don't know something, then you can just look it up, because they have Google for that, right? It's true that you can find out a lot by trawling on the internet. It said that the sort of research that would have taken 15 years before probably would only take a few days of going through internet searches these days. So definitely a lot of things have changed. The trouble with it nowadays is that there's so much information that if you don't have a sense of curating the information and the idea of what's more important than other things, or an idea of the structure of what you're looking at, then you can't find what you're looking for. So the internet is new and it's useful, but it doesn't change everything. You still need the sort of knowledge structures in order to make that access to information useful. We should teach only transferable skills, some people say. It's no use learning things like Latin and, who wants to know what the name of a plant means anyway, we don't need things like arithmetic because we've got calculators. But if you hit the 0 button on your calculator one time too many, and your answer comes out 10 times more than it needs to be, then if you don't have some idea of arithmetic, then you will never notice that your calculator has given you the wrong answer, for example. Sixth myth, that projects and activities are the best way to learn. They can learn to run their own business from the time they're in the classroom, think like an expert. Don't need losers like teachers to teach them things. Well, it's said that if you just copy entrepreneurs and their behavior without understanding why they do things, then it doesn't turn you into an entrepreneur. It turns you into something rather like what's known as the cargo cults, where people put all their faith in the sort of outward or external aspects of people's behavior instead of understanding what's going on beneath the surface, all the knowledge and facts within the mind of an entrepreneur or an expert on which they base their spontaneous decisions. So it's not just about being spontaneous, they're doing that on the basis of a lot of experience that has gone before. So that's actually what the classroom ought to be providing rather than just the behaviors of experts. And lastly, some people say that teaching any sort of knowledge is indoctrination because it's like, oh, maybe the teachers have got some hidden agenda and they want to sort of put over some sort of neoliberal thinking, indoctrinate all the children with this because they've made choices about what's worth teaching and what's not worth teaching. Well, you could say that's true, but in fact, most of the teachers I know, usually they see the value not just of teaching within the comfort zone, but actually pushing children into new ways of thinking that they have not come across before, to provide a safe space in which they can experiment with new ideas and meet new cultures and compare what they have and what they know with things that they haven't learned about yet. Sometimes they need to be pushed to do that. So in fact, what teachers are doing is actually a very valuable job. And hence, learning still continues to be a blessing, despite what some people might say. Within the Buddhist context, the word for learning is the word Bahusutta, which is from the Indian language of Pali. And what it actually means literally is one who has heard a lot. So a person who's heard a lot will be a knowledgeable person. Usually a person who is heard so much that not much surprises them anymore, perhaps. But knowledge, as we shall see, is not just a simple thing to understand, because knowledge in the classroom, for all the great things I just said about it, is not the ultimate of knowledge. Just as theoretical knowledge is not the ultimate of knowledge. The ways we learn about things in the classroom or learn from textbooks or even learn from vocational courses, all that would be counted as knowledge, even within this blessing. And I'm not saying that it's not a blessing, but it's still not the same sort of knowledge that we are talking about when we're thinking about transcendental knowledge or the sort of knowledge that comes from meditation. And there's a very interesting metaphor for how the mind deals with deeper knowledge, which comes from Buddhist scriptures. And in that scripture, the Buddha talks about the metaphor of a person looking into a rock pool. If the rock pool water is clouded, then just by looking at the surface of the water, you can only guess at what might be underneath. And that requires knowledge too, right? Because if you have some sort of knowledge of aquatic biology, then you can probably guess what's making the ripples on the surface of the water, even though you cannot see directly what's going on under the water. However, if the water has suddenly become clear instead of clouded, then you can see directly what's going on under the water. And that would be seen as a sort of direct knowledge or direct understanding. I'm sorry if the fonts are not so clear. The first sort of knowledge, where you are making inferences based on previous knowledge or textbook knowledge or even practical knowledge, this is all either theoretical or occupational knowledge. But where you have the knowledge that comes from seeing directly what's going on under the water, because the water has become clear, that would be equivalent to the sort of knowledge that would come from a clear mind or self-understanding that comes from the ability to see within oneself directly instead of just making inferences about one's feelings or whatever. See the difference? So there are different levels of knowledge. The sort of knowledge I'm talking about today are generally the first two, theoretical knowledge and hands-on knowledge, which probably need to get your reading glasses out. Theoretical knowledge is still a blessing, as I've said. It's worth learning, even those sorts of theoretical knowledge. The first level, theoretical knowledge, in the Buddhist terminology is known as Sutta Maya Panya. And if you are ungenerous, you might refer to it as parrot learning or learning by rote. But it's referred to as basic knowledge because it arises via your 5 external senses. So what you've seen, what you've heard, what you've tasted, and so on. It may even come secondhand to you by listening to information such as lectures or from reading textbooks. But if you can imagine the little child who's told by their parents, don't touch fire, it's hot, it'll burn you, but they still want to touch it anyway because they don't quite believe everything they've heard, because they want the practical experience of something. And that would be, to learn the real meaning of the word hot, would be what's known as hands-on knowledge, which is in the second rung of knowledge, which is to do with taking what you've learned theoretically and applying it to the real situation. In actual fact, this is what all employers want. They don't want just textbook knowledge. They want people who can put that knowledge into some practical purpose. Those two together are really what we're talking about at this level of the blessings of life. But what I'm saying is that even though it's not transcendental knowledge, even though the mind is not yet clear, but even that experience and inference is still very valuable, especially when it comes to earning a living and standing on one's own 2 feet. And to that extent, it is a blessing. Second level, the hands-on knowledge, so the child actually putting their finger in the flame, is known as Cinta Maya Panya. So it's no longer textbook knowledge, it's actually direct knowledge of the real situation. But the third level of knowledge, which we're studying when we're meditating, is a different level completely, the level of the clear rock pool, where you can see directly into the mind and into the nature of yourself or into the nature of what's going on beneath the surface of yourself. That is known as insight knowledge or Bhavana Maya Panya. So a rather more lofty sort of knowledge, which doesn't come from textbooks, which comes from the mind becoming clear. The way it's understood in meditation is that actually you don't need to go looking for the knowledge in your meditation because it's already there, but it's just hidden. But what you're doing in a meditation practice is helping to make that water clearer so that you can then see directly what's going on under the surface. Yeah? But that's for another day. What we're interested in talking about today is the sense of the theoretical knowledge which comes to us in the educational situation. What's the difference between being learned, so first 2 sorts of knowledge, and being wise, which is the insight knowledge? Well, sometimes the wise are not necessarily those who have spent a long time in school. Sometimes you get the sort of I don't know, the peasant sort of leaning on the garden gate, and they can understand the nature of the world very clearly just from their experience. So the wisdom might be rather different from having a degree in something. Usually wisdom comes together with a sense of good habits and virtue, whereas people who have a lot of academic knowledge may still be sneaky people, or misappropriate their knowledge for the wrong sort of ends. A person who is learned and who does well in school generally has quite a good memory, because they need to remember and regurgitate what they have learned, whereas a person who's wise may not necessarily have a good memory for small details, but they know the general gist of what's right or wrong in their habits. And a person who's learned, it's not a guarantee that they might not end up behind bars, because they may be unscrupulous as well as educated. But wisdom generally weeds out the unscrupulous part from the knowledge part. So you're left with knowledge that would bring genuine benefit to oneself and to others. So today I'll finish with a little story, and I'll do a quick change of story, looking at your faces. It's a story about a monk who was very knowledgeable. And for the sake of argument, we're going to call him the blank scripture monk. And this is a little story from the Buddhist scriptures to illustrate the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Yeah? Interested? Yes, okay. So, once upon a time, it's going back 2,000 years, there was a certain monk. You'd probably call him a professor or a lecturer in a university, because he was so knowledgeable and so had such a good memory for all the little intricacies of the teachings which the Buddha had taught. And if anyone asked, when did the Buddha say such and such, oh, he could give you quite a clear exposition about all the details of it. And all his students, many of whom had studied with him for many years, had taken their knowledge, gone off and meditated, and many of them had become enlightened as a result of this. However, Mr. Professor, the blank scripture monk, he never had used his knowledge for anything. All he'd done is collect more and more of it. So he was very respected as a teacher, but somehow, despite his seniority, he hadn't managed to achieve what monks are really supposed to do, which is to get enlightened as a result of their studies. So one day, the Buddha was looking at the audience of monks, and he noticed this Mr. Blank scripture monk. Despite his seniority, was about the only monk left who hadn't got any sort of enlightenment experience. The Buddha thought to himself, how can I humble this guy into making some use out of his knowledge? So the Buddha started to treat him in a special way. Every time this professor or monk started to come for an audience, he wouldn't talk to him, he'd just greet him with the words, "Oh, so you've joined us again, Mr. Blank Scripture." And then after that, he'd just ignore him and talk to other monks. And then when he got up to leave, he said, "Oh, so you're leaving us now, Mr. Blank Scripture." And this happened again and again. He wouldn't engage him in any intellectual conversation anymore. He'd just greet him when he arrived and say goodbye with the words "Blank Scripture" whenever he left. Until eventually, Professor Blank Scripture started to think to himself, there must be a reason why the Buddha is doing this to me. Before he was very nice to me, he had all the intellectual conversations, but now he's not talking to me anymore. He's calling me Mr. Blank Scripture instead. He must be getting at something. And because he was very expert in all the theoretical aspects of things, he realized it's because I only have this theoretical knowledge, I only have the hands-on knowledge, but I don't have the inside knowledge. So what I really must do is go and learn how to turn my knowledge into insights. So he went first of all to one of his most senior students who had managed to get enlightenment as what's known as an arahant, or one who is no longer going to be reborn because they have got such a high level of meditation experience. But the senior one said, what you really need is to go to one of these young monks who's got the strength and the effort to be able to put you through the paces much more than I can. So he sent him off to a more junior monk. And Mr. Professor Guy, he felt this was already rather an embarrassment. You know, instead of being seen to learn from a senior student of his, he's having to learn from a more junior one, which is like a real come down. But the junior one said, no, I think what you really need is to study with one of these really young guys. The young guys who's fresh to the whole subject. They'll be able to put you through your paces much better than I can. So he got passed down the seniority of the monks until he ended up with a novice. But a novice who had become enlightened as an arahant. And the novice, in his wisdom, saw that Mr. Professor still hasn't learned his lesson yet. He's still arrogant. He still thinks he knows it all. He's still not ready to practice. So the novice said to him, do you really want to study with me? And he said, okay, yes, I've been humbled this far, so maybe I need to be accept whatever teachings you can give me. And the novice said to him, I think to hear this teaching, it would be best if you went and stood in the middle of the river. So the monk waded out into the river, and he was going to wade in up to his neck, and the novice said, just stop there, up to your waist is enough. Because he saw that, it's like he got no pride left whatsoever anymore. Now he was about to be able to open up to something which the novice would be able to teach him. So there he was, Mr. Professor, blank scripture monk, standing in the middle of the river, about to listen to this child who's going to teach him how to turn his theoretical knowledge into insight knowledge. And he said, are you ready? And he said, yes, I am. I'm going to accept anything you teach me at this point. And he said, okay, listen carefully. Here's a metaphor for you. There was once a termite mound. Ever seen a termite mound? Like sort of cone-shaped thing, which termites make out of sand or whatever. And in the termite mound there are 5 holes. And inside that termite mound there is a lizard, which you have to catch. Sorry, termite mound has 6 holes in it. Inside that termite mound there is a lizard, which you have to catch. What are you going to do about it? And immediately, because of his knowledge, because of his hands-on knowledge, because of his theoretical knowledge, he could immediately see that the novice was referring in allegory to the 5 senses, plus the extra 1 sense, which is the sense of the mind. So 5 external senses, 1 internal sense, which is the mind, which is able to visualize or see something on the inside of us. And he answered, you have to plug 5 holes and leave 1 hole left over for the lizard to run out of, and then you grab it. Yeah? And the novice said, exactly right. You already got the point. So what he realized is that I must come away from the 5 senses, the eyes, ears, nose, mouth, taste, but I must concentrate on the 1 sense that is left to me, which is the sense of the mind, and cultivate that in order to catch the lizard, which is the metaphor for enlightenment. So he went away and immediately trained himself according to the novice's instruction, and within a very short period of time he managed to upgrade himself from mere theoretical knowledge, mere hands-on knowledge, to insight knowledge from direct clarification of the mind. So Mr. Blank Scripture Monk then thereby became a monk worth his salt, as it were. But the reason he was able to become enlightened so quickly was because he had such a good foundation of theoretical and hands-on knowledge to start with. That's the message for today. For today, I'd like to finish off with a few little announcements. This is our Tuesday class. Generally, it consists of a wisdom talk and 30 minutes of meditation. There's also a Thursday talk for anyone who's interested, where we sit for meditation a little bit longer, and often the talks are in a little bit more depth as well. Apart from that, coming up in next month, we have our first weekend meditation retreat. Starts on a Friday evening, runs until Sunday afternoon, where you can stay over here. These are dormitories up on the 2 sides, and practice meditation for the whole weekend, which may be interesting to you. If you've already done daily meditation to a certain level and you'd like to take it a little bit further, then that might be something you'd like to look into. You can sign up for it on the temple website. And I believe the cost involved is about £70 for all the catering over the weekend. For gentlemen who are interested to take it further than that, you can try out being a monk for 2 weeks or a month during the summer, and we hope that COVID, of course, will have gone away completely by then, allowing us to have more freedom to do in-person activities like this. That will be for the beginning of June and possibly for the whole of the month of June for those who are interested. Generally, we run the course in Belgium so that all the different branches of our organization from all over Europe can send their trainee monks together for the training retreat. Apart from that, for those who like to meditate at home but maybe have already forgotten how to meditate, there is support for meditation in the form of an app called MindGem, MINDGEM, which you can download onto your phone, and it's got lots of meditation audio tracks which you can listen to as you are meditating to encourage you to keep that habit going in your daily life. And I would recommend that you take what you've learned today and try to meditate for 20 minutes a day at minimum in order to keep that habit going, allow your mind to get that clarity which will lead eventually to that insight meditation. Apart from that, we still work online on every Saturday evening. For those of you who maybe are unable to join us in person but find it more convenient to meditate from home, between 7 and 8 British time, we have what's known as the DMEU meditation, which allows you to join via Zoom, meditate and hear a talk online from the comfort of your home. And in 2 weeks' time here, maybe signaled by lots of little candles and lanterns which you see decorating the place, especially today, we have what's known as a full moon meditation, which is meditation plus a little candle lighting ceremony and a themed talk, which the theme this time will be the spreading of the light of hope. And because it is a crossover with what's known as Maka Puja Day in the Buddhist calendar, then we will have a chance to fill the whole of this room with little candle lights as well. So it's usually a very nice ceremony to be able to join for any of you who are free 2 weeks from today at the same time. So that's all I have for you today, but if there are any questions or comments or feedback at this point, I would be very happy to help out. Yes, it's the logo for our Dhammakaya meditation organization is a pagoda, which is the major landmark of our home temple in Thailand. The pagoda itself is made up of lots of tiny Buddha statues, quite similar to the one you can see behind there. That's a sort of expanded version of it, but it's said to symbolize nirvana. Yes, so it's a sort of something to aim for in our practice.